She was 25 and suddenly jobless. No income, no direction, just a broken routine and a quiet fear of what comes next. And somehow, she spent everything she had on a remote cabin by a waterfall. People said it was a mistake. They said buying a remote cabin by a waterfall wouldn't fix anything, that she'd come running back to the city within weeks. But what they didn't know was that this remote cabin by a waterfall was hiding a 40-year secret one that would completely change her life. Before we continue, if stories mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. At just 25 years old, Ava Thompson never imagined her life would collapse overnight. One week, she was working in a sleek marketing firm in downtown Seattle, surrounded by deadlines, noise, and ambition. The next, she was packing her belongings into cardboard boxes. Her job gone without warning after a brutal economic downturn. The silence that followed was unbearable. No emails, no meetings, no purpose. Just an empty apartment and a growing sense that she had lost more than a paycheck. She had lost herself. Desperate for a reset, Ava made a decision that shocked even her closest friends. She withdrew every last dollar from her savings and bought a forgotten cabin hidden deep in the forests of Oregon, miles away from the nearest town. The property sat beside a roaring waterfall, its mist rising like a ghost through the trees. The cabin was old, weather-beaten, and eerily quiet, like it had been waiting for someone. No signal, no neighbors, just the relentless sound of water crashing against stone. Standing there for the first time, suitcase in hand, Ava felt a strange mix of fear and something else, as if this place wasn't just an escape, but the beginning of something she didn't yet understand. The first night nearly broke her. Ava Thompson lay awake on a thin, creaking bed, staring into the darkness as the roar of the waterfall thundered endlessly through the trees. It wasn't soothing like she had imagined. It was overwhelming, relentless, almost suffocating. The sound filled every corner of the cabin, vibrating through the wooden walls like a constant reminder that she was completely, utterly alone. No traffic, no distant sirens, no hum of electricity. Just water and silence between its crashes. By the third day, the isolation began to claw at her mind. She reached for her phone out of a habit, only to remember no signal, no Wi-Fi, no connection to the world she once knew. The digital noise she used to complain about had vanished, replaced by something far more unsettling: her own thoughts. And they weren't kind. What were you thinking? You gave up everything. You don't belong here. The doubts came in waves, just like the waterfall, loud, unavoidable, and impossible to ignore. She tried to distract herself, cleaning, organizing, unpacking the few belongings she had brought. But the cabin resisted her efforts. Dust clung to every surface. The wooden floor groaned beneath her steps. Even the air felt heavy, as if it carried years of abandonment. On the fifth day, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened without warning, and the peaceful forest transformed into something wild and unforgiving. Rain slammed against the windows. Wind howled through the trees. The waterfall grew louder, angrier, until it sounded like it might swallow the entire valley. Inside the cabin, Ava sat curled up near the cold stone fireplace, her hands wrapped tightly around a flickering flashlight. For the first time since arriving, fear crept in. Not just fear of being alone, but fear of being forgotten. No one knew exactly where she was. No one would come looking. That realization hit harder than anything else. As the storm raged on, something shifted inside her. She couldn't keep running, not from the city, not from her past, and certainly not from herself. If she was going to survive here, she had to face the silence, not fight it. The next morning, everything felt different. The storm had passed, leaving behind a strange stillness. The air was crisp. The forest glistened with rain. And for the first time, the sound of the waterfall didn't feel like an attack. It felt alive. Ava stepped outside, barefoot, letting the cold earth ground her. She stood there for a long moment, breathing deeply, listening, not just hearing, but truly listening. The wind in the trees, the distant calls of birds, the steady rhythm of water crashing against rock. It wasn't silence. It was a language she had never taken the time to understand. That day, she made a decision. Instead of treating the cabin like a temporary escape, she would treat it like a place worth rebuilding, starting with the one thing she had avoided since arriving: the fireplace. It stood at the center of the cabin, made of rough, uneven stones, coated in soot and neglect. Something about it felt important, almost like the heart of the place. Armed with nothing but a brush and determination, Ava began scrubbing away years of grime. The work was exhausting. Her hands grew sore, her back ached, and more than once she considered giving up. But she didn't, because for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about what she had lost. She was focused on what she could build. As she cleared away layers of ash and debris, the texture of the stone began to reveal itself older than she expected. Uneven, hand-placed. Not just functional, but deliberate. Whoever built this cared. That thought lingered in her mind as she worked deeper into the structure. And then, her brush hit something hollow. Ava froze. She tapped the same spot again. A dull, echoing sound responded completely out of place among the solid stone. Her heartbeat quickened. Carefully, she pressed against the loose section. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a faint grinding noise, one of the stones shifted slightly inward. A hidden space. Ava's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she hesitated. Every instinct told her to step back, to ignore it, to pretend she hadn't found anything at all. But something stronger pulled her forward. Curiosity, or maybe destiny. With trembling hands, she reached into the dark opening. And in that exact moment, Ava realized something that sent a chill down her spine. This cabin hadn't been abandoned. It had been waiting. Ava's fingers trembled as they brushed against something soft, yet aged. Slowly, carefully, she pulled it out of the hidden compartment. It was a journal. No, several of them. Bound in cracked, dark leather. Their surfaces were damp and slightly rough, as if they had absorbed decades of moisture from the surrounding stone. A faint scent of moss and earth clung to them, making it feel less like she had found books, and more like she had unearthed something that belonged to the forest itself. Her heart pounded. Who would hide something like this? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the distant roar of the waterfall. She carried the journals to the small wooden table near the window, where soft daylight filtered through the dusty glass. For a moment, she just stared at them, unsure whether she should open them at all. This wasn't just a discovery. It felt personal, like stepping into someone else's unfinished story. Finally, curiosity won. Ava opened the first journal. The pages were yellowed, fragile, filled with tight, slanted handwriting. The ink had faded, but it was still legible. At the top of the first page, a date was written. October 3rd, 1986. Her breath caught. 40 years ago, she began to read. The entries weren't random thoughts, they were deliberate, almost methodical. The writer described arriving at the cabin much like Ava had, the same isolation, the same overwhelming sound of the waterfall, the same creeping loneliness that settled in during the first few nights. A chill ran down her spine. It was too similar. Line after line mirrored her own experience, as if time had folded in on itself and she was reading her own thoughts from another life. But then, the tone changed. A few pages in, the entries grew more urgent. The writer spoke of patterns in the land, of something hidden beneath what most people fail to see. There were sketches, rough drawings of the surrounding forest, marked with strange symbols and arrows pointing toward locations Ava didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened as she flipped through more pages. This wasn't just a diary. It was a record of a discovery, or a warning. The deeper she read, the more unsettling it became. One entry, dated November 12th, 1986, was underlined multiple times. They don't understand what this place is. It's not just land. It's a system, a balance. If they find it, they'll destroy it. Ava froze. They, she murmured. Who were they? The next few pages were filled with frantic handwriting, as if the writer had been rushing. Words overlapped, ink smeared. Sentences cut off halfway through. And then, the journal stopped. Abruptly, Ava frowned and flipped a page. Blank. She turned another. Still blank. Her stomach tightened. She moved to the next journal. Same handwriting, same voice. But this one started weeks later, as if the missing time in between had been intentionally erased. And then she saw it. The edges of several pages had been torn out. Not carefully, not cleanly. Ripped. Violently. Ava's chest tightened as a cold realization settled over her. Someone didn't just stop writing. Someone had removed something. Deliberately? Her hands began to shake as she flipped through the remaining journals faster now, searching for answers. Each one told fragments of a larger story about the land, the waterfall, and a growing fear that something valuable was hidden there. Something worth protecting. Or hiding. Then she found the most disturbing entry of all. It was near the back of the final journal, written in darker ink, as if added later. If you're reading this, it means I failed to keep it safe. Ava's breath caught in her throat. Trust no one who comes asking about the water. They will pretend to be curious. They will pretend to care. But they only want control. Her eyes darted across the page. The truth is not in these pages anymore. I had to remove it. I had to hide it somewhere they would never think to look. Ava's heart was racing now. Hide what? Where? Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from outside. Ava jumped, the journal slipping slightly in her hands. She turned toward the window. The forest, which had felt peaceful just moments ago, now seemed different. The trees swayed gently in the wind, but something about the movement felt off, unnatural, as if something or someone was moving between them. Her breath slowed. "Hello," she called out instinctively. No answer. Just the distant, relentless roar of the waterfall. But then, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Near the edge of the tree line, partially hidden behind a thick trunk, there was a mark carved into the bark. A symbol. The same symbol she had seen drawn in the journal. Fresh. Not weathered. Not old. Fresh. Ava stepped back from the window, her pulse pounding in her ears. That symbol hadn't been there before. She was sure of it. Which meant only one thing. Someone else had been here. Recently. And they knew exactly what this place was. As Ava slowly looked back down at the journal in her hands, one terrifying thought settled in. The secret buried in these woods wasn't just a story from 40 years ago. It was still alive, and somehow she had just become a part of it. Ava didn't sleep that night. The journals lay open across the table, their fragile pages trembling slightly in the draft that slipped through the cracks of the old cabin. But it wasn't the cold that kept her awake. It was the realization slowly forming in her mind. This wasn't just someone's personal diary. It was a record of protection, of resistance, of fear. She picked up the final journal again, her eyes locking onto the line she couldn't stop thinking about. They will pretend to care, but they only want control. At first, she had assumed the writer was paranoid, maybe someone who had spent too long alone, letting their imagination spiral. But now, that explanation didn't feel right anymore. Not after seeing the symbol carved into the tree. Not after noticing how deliberately the pages had been torn out. This wasn't madness. This was intention. Ava took a deep breath and flipped back to the earlier entries, this time reading more carefully, more critically. Patterns began to emerge. The writer wasn't just describing the forest, they were studying it, observing water flow, soil changes, plant growth. There were notes about how certain areas near the waterfall seemed unusually fertile, how the mist carried nutrients farther than expected, how the land seemed to heal itself in ways that didn't quite make sense. This wasn't just land. It was a system, a living, breathing ecosystem that functioned in perfect balance. And suddenly, the line that once sounded dramatic now felt like a warning rooted in truth. If they find it, they'll destroy it. Ava leaned back in her chair, her heart racing not from fear this time, but from clarity. The secret wasn't gold. It wasn't hidden treasure. It was something far more valuable. Sustainability, self-sufficiency, a natural system that could thrive without interference, and maybe even teach others how to do the same. And that's exactly why someone would want it. Control it. Exploit it. Her stomach tightened as a new thought crept in. What if someone already tried? She quickly flipped through the journals again, scanning for anything she might have missed. That's when she noticed something subtle but chilling. The tone of the entries changed over time. At first, the writer sounded curious, hopeful, even. But later, they sounded hunted. Shorter sentences, sharper words, mentions of footsteps that didn't belong, of tools left out of place, of the feeling of being watched even when no one was there. Ava's grip tightened on the page. This wasn't just about protecting the land. This was about protecting it from someone. And whoever they were, they had come close enough to scare the writer into hiding the truth entirely. Her eyes drifted slowly toward the window. The forest stood still under the fading light, quiet and almost peaceful. But now she saw it differently. Before, it had felt empty. Now, it felt aware, layered, as if it held stories beneath its surface stories that hadn't fully ended. Ava stood up slowly, walking toward the door. She hesitated for a moment, her hand resting on the handle. Just days ago, she had felt like an outsider here, someone who didn't belong. But now, something had shifted. She wasn't just a visitor anymore. She was connected to this place through the journals, through the discovery, through the unanswered questions that now lived in her mind. When she stepped outside, the air felt different against her skin. Sharper, more real. Her eyes instinctively searched the tree line, landing on the carved symbol. Still there, still fresh, but instead of fear, something else rose inside her. Determination. If someone had been here recently, if someone was still watching, then walking away wouldn't make her safe. It would just leave the truth unprotected. Ava exhaled slowly, grounding herself. For the first time since losing her job, she didn't feel lost. She felt focused, driven by something deeper than survival. The girl who had arrived here broken, uncertain, running from failure was gone. In her place stood someone new. Someone who understood that this cabin wasn't an escape. It was a responsibility. And whatever had been hidden here for 40 years was now hers to uncover. No matter what or who stood in her way, Ava didn't waste another day. The journals were no longer just something to read, they were a map. A guide left behind by someone who had seen what she was only beginning to understand. Early the next morning, with a backpack slung over her shoulder and one of the journals clutched tightly in her hands, Ava stepped into the forest with a new sense of purpose. The air was thick with moisture, the ground soft beneath her boots. Sunlight barely pierced through the dense canopy above, casting shifting shadows that made the forest feel alive, watching, waiting. She flipped to one of the marked pages. A rough sketch of the surrounding area stared back at her. With symbols she now recognized circles, lines, and arrows pointing toward specific landmarks. One of them matched the symbol carved into the tree. Her pulse quickened. "That's where you started," she whispered. Carefully, she followed the direction indicated in the journal, moving deeper into the woods than she had dared to go before. The further she walked, the quieter everything became. Even the sound of the waterfall seemed distant now, replaced by an eerie stillness. Minutes passed, then nearly an hour, just as doubt began creeping back in. She saw it. At first, it looked like nothing more than a pile of moss-covered rocks, but something about it felt wrong. Too intentional, too structured. Ava approached slowly, her breath shallow. She brushed her hand across the surface, clearing away a layer of damp moss. Stone, smooth, placed, not fallen. Her heart started pounding. This wasn't natural. Dropping her bag, she began clearing more of the area, pulling away vines and debris. As the shape revealed itself, her confusion turned into disbelief. It wasn't just a pile of rocks. It was a formation, a deliberate structure low to the ground, arranged in a pattern that seemed almost engineered. Channels, grooves carved into the stone, leading in specific directions. Ava froze as realization hit her. Water. She followed one of the grooves with her fingers, tracing its path until it disappeared beneath a cluster of roots. Then she looked up, scanning the terrain around her. The slope, the positioning, it all aligned. This wasn't random. It was a system. She quickly flipped through the journal again, her hands moving faster now. There, another sketch, more detailed this time. It showed multiple structures like this one, all connected, forming a network that stretched from the waterfall outward into the forest. Ava's breath caught. This wasn't just one hidden structure. There were more, many more, and together, they formed something far bigger than she had imagined. Her mind raced as she stood there, surrounded by the quiet hum of the forest. Whoever built this didn't just understand nature. They worked with it, controlled water flow, nourished the soil, created a self-sustaining ecosystem that could survive, maybe even thrive, without outside interference. It was genius, and it had been hidden for decades. A sudden thought struck her. What if this was the secret? Not something to be taken, but something to be protected. Something that, in the wrong hands, could be replicated, exploited, even destroyed. Ava stepped back, her eyes scanning the area with new awareness. This place wasn't abandoned. It had been preserved, carefully, quietly. And now, she understood why. Her chest rose and fell as a new feeling settled in, not fear, not confusion, but purpose. For the first time since losing her job, Ava felt something stronger than uncertainty. She felt needed. This discovery wasn't just about the past. It was about the future. Her future. The pieces were starting to connect: the journals, the warnings, the missing pages, the symbol carved into the tree. Someone had tried to protect this. Someone had hidden the truth. And someone else might still be looking for it. Ava clenched her fists slightly, her gaze hardening. If that was true, then this wasn't just an opportunity. It was a choice. Walk away, or step into something far bigger than herself. She looked down at the ancient structure one last time, then back at the journal in her hands. The answer was already clear. Ava wasn't here by accident. Losing her job, coming to this cabin, finding the journals, it all felt connected now. Like she had been led here, not to escape her old life, but to build a new one, and this time, it wouldn't be built on deadlines or paychecks. It would be built on something real, something lasting, something worth protecting. As Ava turned and began making her way back toward the cabin, one thought echoed clearly in her mind. The secret had been waiting 40 years. Now, it finally had someone to continue it. The transformation didn't happen overnight. At first, Ava Thompson struggled badly. The forest didn't care that she had once lived in a modern apartment or worked behind a screen. Out here, nothing responded to frustration, and nothing moved faster just because she wanted it to. Every small task demanded effort, patience, and humility. Her first attempt at building a proper fire took nearly 3 hours. Her hands shook. Smoke filled the cabin. She coughed, eyes watering, ready to give up more than once. But when the flame finally caught small, fragile, but alive, something shifted inside her. It wasn't just a fire. It was proof. Proof that she could learn, adapt, survive. And that feeling was addictive. Day by day, Ava began to rebuild her life from the ground up, literally. She studied the journals like they were a lifeline. Every note, every sketch, every observation became a lesson. The previous owner hadn't just documented the land they had left behind: knowledge, a system of living that worked with nature, not against it. Ava started small, collecting rainwater, learning which plants were safe to eat, observing how the mist from the waterfall settled differently across the terrain, just like the journals described. Then she went further. Using the stone structures she had discovered, she carefully cleared debris and restored the water channels. At first, it felt like guesswork, but slowly, something incredible began to happen. The land responded. Water flowed more evenly. The soil grew richer. Plants that had once looked weak began to thrive. Ava stood in the middle of it one afternoon, her hands covered in dirt, her clothes worn and stained, and for the first time in her life, she felt powerful. Not because of status, not because of money, but because she could create something real, something sustainable, something that mattered. But the deeper she went, the more she realized. This wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding the mind of the person who came before her. Late at night, by the fire she had learned to build, Ava would sit with the journals spread around her, analyzing every word. She began to notice patterns not just in the land, but in the writing itself. The writer had evolved, just like she was now. From curious, to cautious, to protective. Ava traced her fingers over the rough pages, her thoughts racing. They weren't hiding from the world, she whispered. They were protecting this from it. That realization changed everything. This wasn't just a forgotten discovery. It was a responsibility passed down unfinished. And now, it belonged to her. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Ava barely noticed the time passing. Her body grew stronger, her mind sharper. The fear that once consumed her had been replaced by something far more dangerous: determination. She expanded her exploration, mapping out more of the hidden structures, each one connected, just like the journal had hinted. A network, a design. A system so advanced in its simplicity that it felt almost impossible it had remained hidden for so long. But she understood why. It wasn't meant to be obvious. It was meant to be protected. And then, there were the signs. Subtle at first. A branch that hadn't been broken before. Footprints that didn't match her own. The faint feeling of being watched when she ventured too far from the cabin. Ava didn't panic. Not anymore. Instead, she adapted. She moved more carefully. Became more aware. More strategic. Because this wasn't just about her growth anymore. It was about defending something that couldn't defend itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the forest, Ava stood near the edge of the waterfall. Mist clung to her skin. The roar of the water no longer overwhelming, but grounding. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing it all in. The fear, the silence, the discovery, the purpose. Everything that had once felt like loss now felt like direction. The girl who had arrived here, jobless, lost, searching for escape, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone capable, someone who had found meaning not in what she had, but in what she was building. Ava opened her eyes slowly, her gaze steady. This was no longer just a place she lived. It was something she protected, something she understood, something she was willing to fight for if it came to that. Because the truth was undeniable now. She hadn't just discovered a secret, she had become part of it. The storm came without warning. One moment, the forest was still heavy with that strange, watchful silence Ava had grown used to. The next, the sky split open with a deafening crack of thunder, and rain poured down in violent sheets, turning the ground into mud within minutes. Inside the cabin, Ava stood frozen near the window, watching as the waterfall swelled into something monstrous, its roar louder than she had ever heard before. But tonight, something felt different, wrong. Her instincts screamed it before her mind could explain it. Then, a sound. Not thunder, not wind, a sharp, deliberate crunch. Footsteps. Ava's breath caught. She slowly turned her head toward the door, every muscle in her body tightening. The rain masked most sounds, but not that one. Someone was out there. Her heart slammed against her chest as she instinctively reached for the flashlight, gripping it like it was the only thing anchoring her to reality. "Hello," she called out, her voice barely steady. No response. Just rain. And the distant, relentless thunder. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Time felt distorted. Then, gathering every ounce of courage she had built over the past weeks, Ava stepped forward and opened the door. Cold rain hit her instantly, soaking her clothes as she stepped onto the wooden porch. Empty. No one. No movement. Just darkness and trees bending under the storm. She scanned the ground quickly, and that's when she saw it. Footprints. Fresh. Deep impressions in the mud, leading right up to her cabin. And stopping at the door, Ava's pulse exploded. They had been standing right there, listening, watching. Her eyes followed the prints, but there were no tracks leading away. Nothing. as if whoever it was had simply disappeared. A chill ran down her spine. Then she noticed something else, lying just inches from the doorway, partially soaked by rain. A single folded piece of paper. Her breath stopped. Slowly, cautiously, she bent down and picked it up. The paper felt old, fragile, familiar, too familiar. With trembling hands, Ava unfolded it, and the moment she saw the handwriting, her stomach dropped. It was from the journal, one of the missing pages, the ones that had been torn out. Her hands began to shake as she read, "If you're holding this, then they've already found you." Ava's heart skipped. I wasn't the only one who discovered the system. There were others, investors, surveyors, people who saw this place not as life, but as leverage. The rain pounded harder, as if echoing the rising panic inside her. I tried to hide it. I removed the key sections, scattered them, buried them where only someone who understood the land could find them. Ava's breathing became shallow. Key sections, scattered. But I made a mistake. Her grip tightened on the page. I trusted someone. A flash of lightning lit up the forest, and for a split second, Ava thought she saw movement beyond the trees, gone just as quickly as it appeared. She forced herself to keep reading. They didn't just want the knowledge, they wanted control of the water, the system, the balance. Her mind raced. Control the water. Control everything. If they come back, and they will, they won't come as enemies. They'll come as helpers, buyers, researchers, but don't believe them. Ava felt her chest tighten, because this place, once revealed, will never belong to nature again. The final line was written darker, deeper, as if carved into the page with fear. And if you're reading this now, it means they're closer than I ever wanted them to be. Ava slowly lowered the paper, her entire body going cold. The storm, the footprints, the missing page returned, not lost, not forgotten, delivered. Her eyes darted back to the forest. The darkness no longer felt empty. It felt occupied, watching, waiting. And then, another realization hit her. This wasn't a warning left behind by chance. This was a message, a signal. Someone knew she had found the journals. Someone knew she understood the system. And now, they were making their move. Ava stepped back into the cabin slowly, locking the door behind her, her mind racing faster than ever before. This was no longer just a mystery. It was a race against people who had been chasing the secret for over 40 years. And unlike the original writer, Ava wasn't running anymore. She looked down at the torn page in her hands, her fear slowly transforming into something sharper, stronger, resolve, because now she understood the truth. The secret she had uncovered wasn't just valuable, it was dangerous, and whoever had come back for it had just made one critical mistake. They had revealed themselves, and Ava Thompson was ready. Ava didn't leave. She thought about it, of course she did. That night, after the storm passed and the forest returned to its eerie stillness, she sat by the fire, the torn journal page resting in her hands. Every instinct told her to run, to pack what little she had left and disappear before whoever was out there decided to come back. Because they would come back. The message had made that clear. But something inside her refused to move. It wasn't stubbornness. It wasn't denial. It was clarity. For the first time in her life, Ava knew exactly why she was here. And walking away now wouldn't just mean losing the cabin. It would mean abandoning something far greater. The next morning, she made her decision. Not out of fear, but out of purpose. Ava stepped outside as the first light broke through the trees, the waterfall roaring steadily in the background. The same sound that once overwhelmed her now felt like a heartbeat constant, grounding, alive. "This isn't yours to take," she whispered softly, her eyes scanning the forest. "And it's not mine to lose." From that moment on, everything changed. Ava stopped reacting and started building. She returned to the stone structures, this time with urgency, not rushed but focused. Every channel she cleared, every pathway she restored, wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about strengthening the system, making it whole again, making it resilient. She used the journals not just as instructions, but as a foundation. Where pages were missing, she adapted. Where information was unclear, she experimented. She learned to read the land the way the original writer had, through observation, patience, and trust. And slowly, the system came back to life. Water flowed cleaner, more controlled. The soil grew darker, richer. New growth spread across areas that had once looked barren. It was subtle at first, but undeniable. Ava stood in the middle of it one afternoon, the mist from the waterfall catching the sunlight, turning the air into something almost surreal. This wasn't just land anymore. It was proof that something pure could exist without being owned, without being exploited. But Ava didn't stop there. She knew the danger hadn't passed. So she prepared. She mapped the land more thoroughly than ever before, created her own coded notes, hid key information in places only someone who truly understood the terrain could find, just like the original writer had done, only this time, she wasn't alone in ignorance. She knew exactly what she was protecting, and exactly who might come for it. Days turned into months again, but this time, Ava wasn't just surviving in the forest. She was shaping it, working with it, becoming part of it. The girl who had once measured her worth by job titles and paychecks now measured it by something entirely different. Balance, growth, purpose. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of gold and amber, Ava stood at the edge of the waterfall once more, the same place where she had once felt small, lost. Now, she felt unshakable. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the water below, not the version of herself who had arrived here months ago, broken and uncertain, but someone stronger, someone who had been stripped of everything, and had built something far more meaningful in its place. She looked out over the forest, her voice steady, almost quiet but filled with conviction. Let them come. The wind carried her words into the trees. Because this cabin was never just a refuge. It was a turning point, a mission, a legacy that had waited 40 years for someone willing to finish what had been started. And now, it had found her. Ava closed her eyes briefly, letting the sound of the waterfall wash over her not as noise, but as a reminder that sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover what truly matters. And sometimes, the life you thought was falling apart was actually leading you exactly where you were meant to be. Ava Thompson's journey reveals a truth most people only understand too late. Losing everything is not always a tragedy. Sometimes it's a redirection. The world often teaches us to chase security, noise, and constant movement. But Ava's story reminds us that growth rarely happens in comfort. It happens in uncertainty, in stillness, in moments when we are forced to confront who we are without distractions. The hidden system she uncovered wasn't just about nature. It was a reflection of life itself. Balance cannot be forced, purpose cannot be rushed, and sometimes The most meaningful paths are the ones we never planned to take. What felt like an ending was actually an invitation to rebuild not the same life, but a better one. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because you never know who might need this reminder today.